So how soon before you guys are printing fully functional T-1000 robots from the Terminator? That's the question I've been wanting to ask.
We're not there yet. That should be an internal research and development project. I think we have a small team that would definitely love to.
They're working in the basement.
So skunk works. So next time you come over and see that, you know what's going on.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you may be listening. This is Latitude, the 43 North podcast. I'm Nate Benson, Digital Media Manager of 43 North, and of course, the host. We are on episode 32 of the podcast, and I am joined by Michael Ulbrich from Buffalo Manufacturing Works. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. Tell me a little bit about what you guys do over at Buffalo Manufacturing Works.
Sure. Buffalo Manufacturing Works is really focused on helping manufacturers of all shapes and sizes identify, develop, and implement cutting-edge manufacturing technologies in order to make a more competitive and sustainable company. So technologies like robotics, 3D printing or additive manufacturing, new materials developments, and things like that.
My dad was a steel worker. He just retired. My first summer out of high school, because the steel mill gave scholarships to all the workers' kids, I worked in the steel mill, and I absolutely loved just being in a heavy manufacturing setting. Didn't obviously go the route of a manufacturer, went to college and all that, but I still, it's in my family's blood. And whenever I go into, Buffalo Manufacturing Works, I'm just in awe of the things you guys do there. Do you get a feeling of that when you go in there every day?
Sure. It is a fantastic place to work. I'm proud to be there every day, and there's just some really amazing technology, some of which are extremely cutting edge and almost one of a kind in the world. So to have those resources here in Buffalo and to see that, definitely get that awe-inspired feeling, and it's a fun place to be, and that's for sure.
If you're a geek or a nerd and just love how things are made, it's kind of like heaven for anyone who kind of likes that type of thing, right?
Yes, it is. To kind of get inside things, and also those technologies of tomorrow, things like robotics and metal 3D printing are technologies that some people aren't exposed to every day. And if you like that sort of stuff, it's a great place to go.
So 3D printers of kind of all shapes and sizes, right? Metal, various types of metals. Kind of go into why a manufacturer would want to use you guys.
Sure. And I'll talk about metal 3D printing or additive manufacturing. Some people might know it by that name as well.
The consumer kind of name is 3D printing, and but yes, additive manufacturing as well.
So I use the terms interchangeably. But a company would look at a technology like that, and therefore Buffalo Manufacturing Works to help them for a lot of different reasons. Like anything else, there needs to be a business case at the end of the day for technology. And one of the major drivers of the adoption of specifically metal 3D printing is reducing the weight of material. So it's a trend in manufacturing called materials lightweighting. So if you're making planes, trains, automobiles, anything that's made out of metal, and you want to reduce costs, which reduce fuel use, this is a technology where you can redesign your parts or components, take material out, and therefore do things more economically. You can also really look at like design. So 3D printing, because you're only putting material where you want it, really allows you to have a lot of freedom and therefore design your parts differently and kind of create whole new value propositions and even supply chain disruptions.
As people who maybe listen to the podcast on the regular know, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist, of course, but I do know basic physics, wherein the heavier something is, the more money it costs to move it. So especially in like the aerospace industry, there's kind of this race to get the strongest, lightest material up in the sky, up in space, and kind of all over the place, right? Sure,
yeah. One example, and I might not have the numbers exactly right, but there's a lot of companies working on space and space exploration now, and it costs, I think it's $20,000 a kilogram, or 2.2 pounds, to put a payload into space. So if you think of removing a few pounds of material, let alone tens or hundreds or thousands of pounds of material, starts to be much more economical pretty quickly. So that's just one extreme example, but that applies out in lots of different industries too.
So at what point, you guys are also helping kind of like some of the smaller, medium-sized businesses with like the R&D aspect of it. Everyone's kind of racing towards this additive manufacturing implementation into their factories or into their workspaces. But again, it's an expensive proposition, especially if you're a smaller, medium-sized business. So you guys are there to kind of help with possible R&D type implementation, kind of one-offs of, could we do this, or do we need to think of an all new manufacturing method altogether?
Yeah, that's right. So we help companies, especially those smaller and medium-sized companies, first and foremost do technology road mapping. So something like 3D printing, and especially metal 3D printing, has tons of potential applications, but a lot of risks. So we help the companies de-risk that by looking at the value proposition and the business case for the 3D printing, and then we can actually help them with the implementation. And so, as you mentioned, we can do a lot of work on feasibility, for example, see if it's even possible to make something of a given material, for example, do the science work that's required underneath, and then really prove it out, and then that can be something that they choose to make an investment in equipment and people and scale up.
If I'm not mistaken, you guys are going to be launching a kind of small, medium-sized business program specifically relatively soon, correct? Can you kind of go into those details of what benefits there are for that?
Yeah, a lot more to come on that soon, so watch this space. But we're going to be working with specifically small and medium-sized manufacturers in the Western New York area through a funnel kind of program where we help them do an innovation assessment, understand like really where they are. Are they behind the times? Are they leading edge, or are they in the middle, want to innovate and don't know where to begin? And then provide a suite of services from workshops and cohort-based training programs all the way through on-the-floor factory assessments where we look at the processes and products to really help these companies really look at a pathway towards innovation and then ultimately help them with the innovation. So that's all pre-doing the work, for example, on a metal 3D printer and figuring out what the product is. But that's a lot of what we see small and medium-sized companies needing, is that helping them make the case from a business standpoint first, and then really working on the development and implementation.
As you know, Western New York has a rich lineage of innovation, and I think that's why there was such a boom in Buffalo back at the turn of the 20th century. We kind of got on the cusp of innovation back then. Things died out in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. We're getting back to having this mindset as a community of innovation's a good thing, taking risk. Where does Buffalo Manufacturing Works play into that kind of revival of the innovative manufacturing spirit in the community?
Sure. And that's a great summary, right? Manufacturing has been kind of core of the fabric of Western New York since the 1800s. I'm sure lots of people know lots of things invented here in Buffalo, right? From air conditioning to the first U.S. jet plane and many other things. And there's still a lot of amazing things that are made here, right? Flight control systems, industrial gases, basically any roll-up door that you would see in tractor trailers, the lights on the Eiffel Tower, those are all things that are made here in Western New York. So there's a ton of innovation that still exists. But right now there's a lot of opportunity for even more companies that maybe have been doing this for multiple generations to kind of leapfrog and be the future innovators. So Buffalo Manufacturing Works, for the existing manufacturing base, really wants to be at the center of that. We've been only around for 2.5 years, but we feel like we've had a great initial impact. And we want to not only help companies with the really hard work of applied research and development and identifying technologies, but also start to create that buzz and that ecosystem where more and more companies are realizing that these resources are here and getting excited about how they can be innovators and don't have to think of it as laggards by any means.
I was talking to Nadine over at Buffalo Manufacturing Works. We were doing some stuff for 43 North, and she kind of this great, kind of analogy, so to speak, where 43 North helps bring in those companies and hopefully some additive manufacturing companies or manufacturing companies that could benefit from it, and then you guys are kind of there for that next phase, so to speak. And do you guys see yourself as a pivotal role in kind of the blossoming startup ecosystem here in Western New York?
Yeah, I think if you think about companies that are either coming to Western New York or already growing here in Western New York, there's a lot of resources through 43 North and other areas in the startup ecosystem that can really support them from that early idea generation to raising some money, getting through to that next round. And as those companies transition into established manufacturers where they have some product that they need to make at scale, it doesn't need to be millions, but they're making something. We think Buffalo Manufacturing Works can definitely play a role. We can help with kind of initial technology advisement for those companies, how they design their products and how they're going to make them, but then really help with the applied research and development as they start to scale. So you mentioned Nadine. I think that's a great way of putting it. We've got a great team at Buffalo Manufacturing Works, and they're all really excited to be about being a part of this. And as these companies in the early stage kind of startup ecosystem grow, I think there's lots of areas for Buffalo Manufacturing Works to help.
And you guys are part of a kind of a greater organization, EWI, based out of Ohio, where R&D implementation, where again, things aren't practical for necessarily a business to implement themselves. EWI is there as this kind of R&D facility, so companies can test things out. And so you guys, in itself, have a long lineage of kind of innovating and being there for startup communities, right?
Yeah, actually, EWI has been around for over 30 years, based in Columbus, Ohio, and definitely has a long lineage of innovating and helping companies of all shapes and sizes. I mean, we work with some of the largest companies in the world. We work with early stage companies that are just looking to scale. So it's not our first time doing this. We've only been here, like I said, for a couple of years, but Buffalo and Western New York are ripe right now. There's a lot of activity going on. There's a lot of manufacturing companies. Manufacturing is still really important in Western New York.
Still one of the top industries, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's still the third largest employer. Employs over 60,000 people in Buffalo and Western New York. Contributes over $6 billion of economic activity. So a huge part of it. And that's part of what we want to do as well, is get people into our facility and manufacturing facilities around the area and see that manufacturing is real, because very often people think that things aren't made anymore in the U.S., let alone in Western New York. And like I mentioned before, there's still a ton. So there's an image thing that can happen as well. And as more and more people open their doors and show the future of manufacturing, it's not that old, dark, dirty, dull, and dangerous.
It's not bright. Thousands of guys turning a widget every day.
Not at all. I mean, it's cutting edge stuff, and there's a lot of manufacturers in Western New York that are going to be a big part of the future.
One kind of the sexy phrases people say is, high tech jobs or high skilled jobs. And like you said, the folks turning the widgets, those jobs died away a long time ago. We don't want them back. Is what Buffalo Manufacturing Works, the supporting of additive manufacturing and partnering with businesses, is that a great step forward in terms of ensuring the future viability of manufacturing here is those high-paying, high-skilled labor jobs?
Yep, that's exactly right. The manufacturers of the future, the ones that are going to be thriving in 10, 15, 20 years from now, are the ones that are doing something unique, right? And that's the manufacturing that still exists in Western New York and the U.S., right? Highly valued, highly engineered products, a unique value proposition, something different, right? And if we can help more and more of those companies adopt more and more of these cutting edge technologies like additive manufacturing, robotics, those companies are going to be competitive. And that's ultimately, why we're here. And if those companies are competitive, they're growing their workforce, better economic impact in the region. And we think that, you start to get a positive flywheel and, reverse many of the trends that we had before. They're going to be different jobs. They're not the jobs of yesterday, and I don't think we want the jobs of yesterday, but they're going to be those really high-value, high-paid jobs that have a high multiplier effect in the economy and mean a lot to the families that are employed by those manufacturing companies.
You mentioned different jobs. One of the jobs, or one of the companies rather, in Western New York that I think are doing such an innovative job of doing something that's normally done overseas is Back USA, and you guys help implement their cobotics program. Can you kind of go into detail, not too much detail, but describe what that a cobot is, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. So cobot, just in terms of definition, is short for human collaborative robot. And so the background there is traditionally robotics, if you think of an auto assembly line in Detroit, is behind a safety cage and is doing the same thing all day, every day, right? Fixed automation. What we're doing with Back USA and many other companies is taking human collaborative robots, so a robot that works side by side with the human operators, to do a task and add value on kind of both sides of that equation. So Back is a fantastic company. They're an awesome success story here in Western New York. They make, for those that don't know, they make their tablets by hand. One of the only, if not the only, tablet manufacturer in the U.S. And so we figured out a way to work with them to remove one piece of the operation that their operators hated doing, which was screwing in these tiny little screws. So we developed a human collaborative, or a cobot system, where there's 5 workers, and the sixth worker is the cobot. They've named the cobot. It's part of their team. And the cobot takes the tablet from them. They do all the assembly except this one step. The cobot does the screwing and then gives it back to the human. The human finishes it. And it's been great. If you go see their facility, it's front and center of what they're doing. Their workers love it. And I think it's just a great example of how you can use technology in a really creative way that doesn't detract from human labor at all, but really enables it and has an even better environment for everybody.
It's a great setup too, because it's kind of like a semicircle, half little pod where the cobot's in the middle of it, and all the other, the folks on the assembly are able to keep working and then kind of pass it off. It's really kind of innovative. It's it's not a line, so it's like when you think of like the old Ford assembly lines, it's not this monotonous passing it down the line. It's actually everyone's still able to kind of chat with each other, and it's a little less formal.
Yeah, it's a team, right? It's a team-based approach, and it's definitely not a line. It's innovative. The technology's innovative. The company's innovative. And if you just go and look at it, it looks cool too, right? So I think it's a company that has a bright future ahead of them, and we're really proud to be working with them.
So I know, Buffalo Manufacturing Works has some of the leading additive manufacturing, kind of scientists or the minds in additive manufacturing working here out of Buffalo. So where is additive manufacturing going? How much longer before it's really at the cusp of, we're going to start seeing many things that, we find in our kitchen or in our garages that are being processed and made by additive manufacturing,
Sure.
in your opinion?
Yeah, and it all depends on kind of the product set. So kind of lower cost, lower value products, those are being mass produced with plastic additive manufacturing or plastic 3D printing today. So that exists. In the space of metal 3D printing, it's still earlier in the game. The technology's only been around for about 10 years, but it's moving very, very quickly. There are parts that are metal 3D printed that are going into airplanes, that are going into the human body, so orthopedic implants. So there's things in production now. It's not just used for prototyping. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and that's a big part of what we're doing is how can we make a step change in terms of how fast these technologies are, the quality of the technologies, in-process monitoring of the technologies to see an error when you make it and correct it as you go along. So there's definitely real-world applications, especially in high-cost, high-engineer, high-value industries right now, and I think that's only gonna continue as we move forward. So it's a pretty exciting time. It's one of those things where you feel that you're at the relatively beginning stages of something really big. And really interestingly, too, in Western New York, there's a number of companies that are working on that space. So I know you've had Post-Process on the podcast before. Moog is an aerospace company here in Western New York that is really leading the charge on metal additive manufacturing. So we're kind of developing this ecosystem here. And I think as the technology grows and all these companies that are working on it grows, we're all going to start to see more and more benefits.
What does Western New York, manufacturing companies or, political leaders, what do we need to do to make sure Buffalo kind of becomes the capital of additive manufacturing? We've got a great resource, with you guys, other startups like Post-Process, who a year ago only had 5 or 6 employees at the Olmsted Center. Now they've quadrupled their workforce. So we're getting some traction. What do we need to do now to really go full throttle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we need to continue to build the ecosystem, right? So all the players that are playing in it need to keep moving forward. We also need to recognize, I think, that we have to think nationally first in some ways in order to get to local impact. So a lot of the adopters, especially, and I'm going to talk about metal additive manufacturing because that's the area that those people are really working on. A lot of the early adopters are national and international companies. And those are going to be the ones that push the technology forward to get over the technical challenges so that it can be more mass adopted. So as long as we keep our eyes on the big picture and not narrow it to like just thinking about Western New York, but we have to think of kind of the national stage as the means to getting to the important end, which is having more and more companies. So, these companies I mentioned before were all attracting interest. Just a few months ago, we had over 100 companies, any major aerospace, defense contractor, we're all here in Western New York for a closed meeting on the future of metal additive manufacturing. But those companies are coming here. They're seeing it, and they're like, first of all, they're like, oh, this is Buffalo, because we're changing perceptions about who Buffalo is, just like 43 North does every time somebody comes to look at the finals. But getting those companies to come back, do more and more work with the people here, and eventually, start to invest more and more in the region. So I think, in summary, I'd say it's got to play the long game, because this is a groundbreaking technology that's not going to make the change overnight. And if we keep focused on the long game, I think we could be really successful.
And it probably helps that Buffalo Manufacturing Works has, like you said earlier, one-of-a-kind equipment that these types of manufacturers are looking to either implement or use or subcontract. It certainly helps that you guys have been able to isolate that type of equipment and be the only ones to have it who aren't the government, right?
Yeah. So you talked about kind of the future. So some of it is looking at what we call large format additive manufacturing. So very often when you're printing something in metal 3D printing, it's kind of shoebox size or smaller. We have, as you reference, some machines that can print things in feet dimensions, so 5 feet by 5 feet by 7 feet, and even larger in some instances. And those are rare at this stage, kind of one-of-a-kind resources. There's either 5 or 6 of them in the world, and the other 5 are inside a company that's not open to the public or open to companies to do development work on it. So let's leverage those resources. Let's make it known that they're here, because it's really rare that those sort of resources are in a place like Buffalo, and that's going to allow us to work with companies here in Western New York, but also companies around the country, and really, raise the profile of what we're doing here.
So how soon before you guys are printing fully functional T1000 robots from the Terminator? That's the question I've been wanting to ask.
We're not there yet.
That
there? Should be an internal research and development project. I think we have a small team that would definitely love to.
They're working in the basement.
So skunk works. So next time you come over and see that, what's going on.
Speaking of, bigger projects, you guys are going to be on the move soon. You want to talk a little bit about that? It's still locally, but
sure.
Growth, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, it's great. We've only been around for a couple of years, but we're already starting to burst at the seams, which is a good problem to have. But we're really excited to be moving over on the east side of Buffalo, an area called the Northland Corridor, as part of a broader neighborhood revitalization and manufacturing campus. It's a long-term vision again, similar to what's happened here on the medical campus over the past 10 to 15 years, trying to create a manufacturing campus over there. So we're going to be co-located with some key partners. There's a regional workforce training center that's coming online that's really focused on upskilling the current workforce for kind of the new jobs. So we're going to be under the same roof for them. And so, a manufacturer is going to be able to come in and go left for training and upskilling, go right for innovation, go straight to our other partner, Insight Consulting, for process improvement work. So it's going to be really exciting, and hopefully we start really creating a manufacturing campus over there.
One of the things you guys are currently doing, which I think is great, and 4th North to a degree does something similar, is connecting with students. And I know through the West New York STEM Hub, you guys have had some 3D printing, kind of competitions and things like that. Why is it so important to get down to the student level and let them know that this technology exists, it's local, and it could be your future job one day?
Yeah, so it's really fascinating work. So we started together with Praxair's Global Giving Foundation, a additive manufacturing learning lab where we have local high school students from Buffalo Public Schools come in and actually get exposed to the 3D printing technologies, understand the 7 recognized 3D printing technologies. They get hands-on exposure, have their own printers, and work on print and design. And it's great, right? These kids come in and they see how a STEM career, science, technology, engineering, math, could really make sense to them. And there's nothing cooler to a kid at that age than 3D printing or robotics. So Susan Witt, who runs our learning lab, has been great and has developed great curriculum. And actually the move over to Northland that I mentioned, which is going to take us about 2 years away for us to get over there. But we're going to be scaling that program to be working with multiple hundred students and teachers a year. So for us, the reason it's really important, and I think for the manufacturing, the reason that it's important, is that it's getting these kids exposure to career paths, but also starting to build the long-term talent pipeline for the jobs of tomorrow. So when we're teaching them on 3D printing, there's not a lot of jobs in metal 3D printing today, but these are going to be the kids that are going to have opportunities in a few years for the jobs that don't even really exist yet. And I think it's really important for Buffalo's long-term survival. We talked about, the future jobs. A lot of those are going to be things that we don't even know yet, and getting kids thinking about design in 3 dimensions and printing and what that means, that's only going to benefit Western New York in the long term if we have that long-term talent pipeline.
So if people want to learn more about Buffalo Manufacturing Works, what can they do?
Sure. BuffaloManufacturingWorks.com. You'll find a lot of information on our website. Also, you mentioned our parent company, which is EWI, so EWI.org. You'll find a ton of information on there. We're here in downtown Buffalo, corner of Main and Virginia, and we have tours from time to time, and always welcome to have people come by and check us out.
I will say it's one of the just coolest, kind of awe-inspiring, sites, I've seen in Buffalo, and I've seen a lot, especially in my previous life as a reporter. Walking in there, you kind of feel like you're walking into the future, and especially when those printers are going and you're seeing stuff printed in front of you. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, it's great. So thanks, and we love doing it, and we have a lot of fun every day. So thanks for the support.
And last but not least, aside from the T1000s, what's the kind of the coolest thing you've seen printed out of there without violating any non-disclosure agreement? Because I'm sure there's one or two you've had to sign.
Yeah, that's a hard part. Actually, right now we've got a big part of our lab cordoned off because we're doing some really confidential work. I think some of the coolest stuff has been the work in the medical space. So working with companies on printing things and materials that have never been printed before, like magnesium, or we don't know if it's been printed before. And then there are things that go into the human body and then biodegrade over time once they have a positive effect on bone growth, for example. So the fact that you can print something, insert it into the body, and unlike a titanium screw that's going to be there forever, it's going to corrode over time. Your body's going to heal. In this case, it's for bone ailments. That just blows my mind in many cases, and I'm exposed to this every day.
Right.
So there's that, and then there's things that are going into rockets and submarines, and those are pretty common these days. So there's a lot of cool stuff, but a lot of the work that we do is kind of the fundamental stuff behind it, and we're just trying to enable more and more of those end uses so that there's hundreds and thousands of them in the future.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast, and we'll check in with you down the road after the big move to Northland.
Great. Thanks, Nate.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.